Get ready because we're going deep into a story that
Mhm.
starts with, like an offer that seems almost too good to be true
Yeah.
and ends up kind of revealing some unsettling truths about, this whole idea of post-separation abuse and
Mm,
the systems that are, meant to protect the vulnerable.
right.
So we're going to unpack Lorraine Marshall's blog post called When 4 Months Turns into 4 Years. And it's
Mm.
basically chronicling this like really harrowing journey after her 11-year relationship ends.
Yeah, I think one of the things that grabs me immediately is how, this case really shows how insidious emotional abuse is and how it can, escalate after a separation.
Hmm.
A lot of times people think, oh, the relationship's legally over, it should be done. But that's not always the case, especially when you have these issues of financial control
It
involved.
really makes you think twice about that whole clean break thing, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So Lorraine and her partner relocate to Spain, right?
Yeah.
And almost immediately they split up, but then he offers to pay off her UK mortgage. Like, help her buy a house in Spain outright, cover all the moving and legal fees,
Wow.
even let her take the furniture. I mean,
It sounds amazing.
who wouldn't be tempted by that?
Right, that's exactly the point. It's like almost like a carefully crafted trap, It's almost too good to refuse.
Right.
And abusers will often use these grand gestures as a way to manipulate their partners. It
Yeah.
creates this sense of obligation that's so hard to break free from. So on the surface, it looks like generosity,
Right.
but underneath, it's really often about power and control.
And that becomes like terrifyingly clear just a few weeks later.
Oh, wow.
There's this incident with a real estate agent that like coldly changes the whole dynamic.
Okay.
So Lorraine mentions like some minor traffic noise
Hmm.
to potential buyers, and boom, her ex just like explodes, accusing her of sabotage.
Oh, wow.
She even quotes him in the blog post, and he says, "Don't F about with me. I'm in control. You do as I say, or I can throw you onto the streets."
Oh.
Talk about a chilling shift in tone.
Yeah, that outburst. It's not about, noise complaints. It's about dominance.
Right.
He's asserting his power, reminding her that, he's the one with the money.
Right.
And he can leave her with nothing if she defies him.
Right.
The fact that this happens in front of a third party is just another layer of manipulation, right? It's a public display of control meant to humiliate and silence her.
It's almost like he's sending a message to not just Lorraine, but to anyone who might even think about questioning his authority.
Exactly.
And then, as if that's not bad enough, he hits her with this ultimatum.
Okay.
She has 4 months to buy the house herself, sell it, or face eviction.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, how do you even process that kind of pressure in the middle of a breakup?
It's a classic coercive control tactic.
Mhm.
Imagine you're already going through the emotional turmoil of a separation,
Yeah.
and then you add the threat of homelessness on top of that, all while you're trying to figure out this foreign legal system.
Right.
It's a recipe for complete overwhelm. Yeah.
He's deliberately putting her in a position of vulnerability where she's more likely to just do whatever he says.
Yeah. And that's when Lorraine starts reaching out for help,
Okay.
but she just hits all these roadblocks, gets conflicting advice.
No.
She calls this national helpline,
Yeah.
and they tell her, okay, you need to have a solicitor with you when you file a police report.
Mm-hmm.
But then when she tries to do that at the Guardia station, they tell her, no, it's not necessary.
Oh, wow.
This is where, we see the systemic issues starting to play a role.
Yeah, and it's incredibly frustrating, even for someone who isn't already in crisis mode.
Right.
These inconsistencies just create so much confusion and doubt.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it even harder for victims to trust the process. It's like the system itself is gaslighting her,
Right.
undermining her attempts to seek help and making her question her own perceptions.
And then there's, the language barrier
Yeah.
and the whole complicated thing of trying to navigate a foreign legal system.
Right. I mean, we're talking about things like gender violence complaints and legal concepts like coercive control.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff that's difficult enough to understand in your native language, let alone when you're dealing with all the emotional fallout of abuse.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to understand what coercive control actually means. Because it's not just about isolated incidents of anger or aggression.
Right, yeah.
It's a whole pattern of behaviors that are designed to control every aspect of a person's life.
Right.
From finances to social interactions.
Yeah.
It's a slow, insidious process that can be incredibly difficult to recognize.
Right.
let alone prove in a legal setting.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we really need to unpack further because it's such a key part of this whole story,
Yeah.
and how it plays out in Lorraine's experience.
Right.
So I think we're going to take a quick break and then we'll come back and really delve into those details.
Yeah, I think that's important because it's something that people don't always fully grasp,
Yeah.
the extent of it.
Yeah. And we'll talk about how that plays into the legal aspects of this case.
Absolutely.
And what Lorraine faces as she tries to, navigate this whole system.
Yeah. And the challenges that she faces in trying to prove what she's going through.
Exactly. So stay with us.
Be right back.
It's not just the legal system that's failing her, though.
Bye.
There's this really chilling detail in Lorraine's story where she manages to record a conversation with her ex-partner.
Mm-hmm.
I know we can't play the entire recording, but can you give us a sense of what it reveals?
Yeah, I mean, the recording really captures, the essence of his controlling and abusive behavior.
Mm-hmm.
His tone is menacing. He's using threats and intimidation to try and keep Lorraine in line.
Yeah.
And, this kind of documentation is so invaluable in these cases because it provides concrete evidence.
Right.
It's not just he said, she said.
It really underscores how important it is to, document abuse whenever possible.
Absolutely.
Because it's easy to just dismiss isolated incidents as, oh, it was just a bad argument.
Right.
But a recording is
Yeah, it provides that undeniable proof that there's a pattern of behavior.
Exactly. And in Lorraine's case, this wasn't just a one-off thing.
Right.
She talks about this pattern of legal threats, utility disconnections, this constant fear of eviction.
Yeah, these are all classic tactics of post-separation abuse.
Right.
They're designed to keep the victim off balance, keep them dependent.
Right. She's desperately trying to rebuild her life.
Yeah.
But it's he's determined to sabotage her every step of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the court hearings.
Right.
She talks about feeling completely unheard.
Mm-hmm.
The judge was just dismissive of her claims and just focused on the legalities of the eviction.
And this is really common, unfortunately, in cases of emotional abuse because it can be so difficult to prove in court.
Yeah.
You often don't have the same kind of tangible evidence that you would with, say, physical abuse. So it becomes a matter of one person's word against another's.
Right.
And abusers are often very skilled manipulators. They can present this very convincing facade.
It's the system is set up to protect the abuser rather than the victim.
Sadly, sometimes it feels that way.
But here's where it gets even more complicated.
Okay.
Lorraine's blog post mentions that her ex-partner might have been using legal actions, possibly even something called a SLAPP suit as a form of intimidation.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that is and how it plays into this story?
So SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation.
Okay.
And it's basically a tactic that's used to silence critics by burdening them with the cost of a legal defense.
Oh, wow.
So essentially, they're bullying them into silence. It doesn't really matter if the lawsuit has merit or not. The goal is just to exhaust the victim's resources and prevent them from speaking out.
So it's weaponizing the legal system itself.
Exactly.
Using it as a tool of abuse.
Exactly.
It makes it even harder for victims to come forward,
Right.
knowing that they could be hit with a bunch of legal actions just for sharing their experiences.
And in Lorraine's case, she's already dealing with the stress of a potential eviction, financial instability, the emotional toll of the abuse.
Right.
To then have to deal with the threat of a lawsuit on top of all that. It's overwhelming.
It's a reminder that post-separation abuse can take so many different forms.
Absolutely.
And it's often about way more than just physical violence,
Right.
It's about using any means necessary to maintain power and control, even if it means manipulating the legal system to your advantage.
And, even if those legal actions are eventually dismissed, the damage is already done. The victim has endured months, if not years, of stress, anxiety, and financial drain.
Yeah.
It can take a very long time to recover from that kind of trauma.
It's devastating to even think about.
Yeah.
But despite all of this, Lorraine shows this incredible resilience, right?
Yeah.
Instead of letting the situation consume her, she finds ways to reclaim her power.
Right.
She starts writing a book about her experience,
Mhm.
launches YouTube channels,
Yeah.
explores affiliate marketing,
That's great.
and she even seeks support from the British Embassy.
That's amazing.
It's inspiring to see her taking back control of her narrative.
It's a crucial part of the healing process, you
Really?
know,
Yeah.
finding outlets for your creativity, connecting with others who understand what you're going through, advocating for change. These are all ways to move from being a victim to being a survivor.
It's about turning pain into purpose, right?
Exactly.
Using your experience to help others and maybe even spark this larger conversation
Absolutely.
about the systemic issues that are at play.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the resolution of Lorraine's case,
Okay.
because this is where things get even more complicated.
Yeah, okay.
The criminal charges against her are eventually dismissed,
Mm-hmm.
but she's still facing eviction
Oh, wow.
and hasn't received any compensation for her ordeal. It feels like a very incomplete sense of justice.
It does. It really does.
Right.
Yeah.
It really shows you like the limits of the legal system, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to these really complex cases of emotional abuse,
Mm-hmm.
just because charges are dismissed doesn't mean that the trauma goes away
Absolutely.
or that the financial losses, were just forgotten.
Right.
It's like, okay, the system's acknowledging the harm was done,
Yeah.
but it doesn't actually offer any way for her to, heal or to hold anyone accountable.
Right. It raises questions about what justice really means in these situations, right?
Right.
The legal outcome might be a win, technically,
Right.
but it doesn't address the deeper issues, the power imbalances, the lasting impact of the abuse.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
Lorraine's blog post isn't just her personal story.
Right.
It's like a plea for actual change in the system.
Yeah.
She's asking people to, look at these gaps in the legal system and advocate for better support,
Mm-hmm.
especially for victims of emotional abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some concrete steps that we could take
Yeah.
to actually make a difference?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need a broader definition of domestic abuse.
Okay.
One that goes beyond just physical violence. Coercive control needs to be recognized.
Yeah.
By law enforcement, by the judicial system, by social service agencies. Right. We need training programs, not just for recognizing the signs, but for actually responding to it appropriately.
And I imagine that also means changing how we gather evidence.
Absolutely.
And how we present cases in court, right?
Yeah, because relying only on physical proof or eyewitness testimony, it just doesn't really capture the really insidious nature of emotional manipulation.
We need to look at those patterns of behavior.
Exactly.
The financial control, the isolation tactics, the undermining.
Right, all of that.
Yeah.
Documentate, like that recording that Lorraine made can be crucial, but we also need legal professionals who are trained to recognize that and to present that evidence effectively.
It's about giving victims a voice, right?
Absolutely.
So that their stories are actually heard and understood in court.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also about holding the abusers accountable, right?
It's definitely.
Not just for their actions,
right,
but for the lasting damage that they inflict.
Exactly. There needs to be a very clear understanding that emotional abuse has consequences, legally and socially, and that includes addressing the misuse of legal tactics like those SLAPP suits, which are often used to just silence victims and prevent them from getting help.
It almost sounds like we need a whole new legal framework that's specifically designed to address, post-separation abuse and coercive control.
Yeah, that might be the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
But, in the meantime, we can push for reforms within the existing systems.
Right.
We can advocate for better training, increase funding for victim services, and legislation that really recognizes these non-physical forms of abuse.
And I think on an individual level, we can all educate ourselves about these issues.
Absolutely.
Support organizations that are working to protect victims. And challenge those norms that perpetuate silence and minimize the impact of emotional abuse.
Yeah, we all have a role to play in creating a world where emotional safety is valued and where victims can speak out without fear of retribution.
Lorraine's story is a powerful example of that, right?
It's a call to action.
Yeah.
It reminds us that change is possible, but it takes all of us working together.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into a story that's both, deeply personal and so relevant to this larger conversation about abuse, power, and the search for justice.
Absolutely.
If anything you've heard today has resonated with you or raised concerns,
Yeah.
please reach out for help. You don't have to go through this alone.